Assalamualaikum. This video is about a comparison between two short stories written by William Faulkner and Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Living in a strong patriarchal culture, women's freedom is confined as the society expects them to become a submissive daughter to their father or being a selfless wife to her husband. So today, we will compare two American short stories, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman and A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. In this video, we will look at the similarities and differences in their themes, settings, characters, psychological perspectives, symbolism, and Gothic element. The second short story that we are going to discuss is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. It is a short story which revolves around an aristocrat woman named Emily Garrison, or the narrator will also address her as Miss Emily because of her family's influence in the town. This story took place in an imaginary town called Jefferson in Mississippi. Her life was pretty much revolved around her father, her mates, and a few suitors that were supposed to be wed to her.
Mr. Grierson, I thought perhaps Miss Emily would... If there's a dance next Saturday.
She won't attend any dances.
There are several elements that hint the existence of Gothic nature of the story, which are the Emily's description, herself, her house, the poison that she bought, and eventually the ending.
The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It is a first-person narrative of a 19th century woman suffers from a mental breakdown after giving birth. The narrator's husband, named John, brings the narrator to a beautiful and secluded estate in a summer to treat her sickness. The narrator is sick, and her husband, who is a doctor, believes that she suffers a temporary nervous disorder. She thinks that writing and socializing are the best cure for her health. But her husband believes the other way. He orders the narrator to rest again, along with scheduled medication, regimes of tonics, air, and exercise. Using the phrase, "Trust me, I'm a doctor," he always wins in argument. John chooses them a spacey and airy room with barred window on the upstairs of the house, which has been used for a nursery before. But the narrator doesn't like the room. Also, the narrator hates the yellow wallpaper in the room. Lacking of interesting activities to do, the narrator only stares at the yellow wallpaper, and later she becomes fanatic of it. She begins obsessively tracing the pattern of the wallpaper. Then, she says that the wallpaper smells like a yellow smell. After observing the wallpaper so much, the narrator believes that there's a woman trapped within the paper. She becomes convinced that the front pattern of the wallpaper moving because the trapped woman shakes it.
I need you, now.
Darling, why is the door locked?
It's no use. You can't open it.
Darling, let me in.
John, dear, the key is down by the front steps.
Open the door.
I can't. The key is on the front steps, John.
For God's sake, what are you doing?
At the end of the story, she decides that she has to free the trapped woman by stripping the wallpaper off. When her husband comes into the room, the narrator creeps around the room, peeling the wallpaper off the wall. She declares, "I've got out at last, and you can't put me back. Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time." Later, her husband faints, but the narrator continues creeping around the room.
Let's look at the differences between the two short stories. In terms of the theme, A Rose for Emily revolves around the themes of isolation, which it is about an extreme isolation faced by Emily Grayson, physically and emotionally. Faulkner illustrates how human beings become isolated by their families, by their community, by tradition, by law, by the past, and by their own actions and choices. In The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Gilman, the theme of freedom and confinement is portrayed inside. The narrator is inherently confined to a single room in a large house. She will always be left behind by her husband, as he is also occupied with his job as a big shot doctor. Next is the Gothic elements. In A Rose for Emily, it is a representative of the Southern Gothic story, since the themes of affection, loss, death, and murder are in one piece. Emily, the protagonist, is described by the inhabitants of town as being weird and lonely. They describe her look as tumid, sort of a body long submerged in still water. Another portrayal of the Gothic is Emily's house. Her house is described as being damp, large, empty, and filled with corners to cover secrets. While The Yellow Wallpaper has some parts that link it to the Gothic genre, this person narrative reads sort of a diary, and therefore the reader follows the verbalizer as she records her worsened mental condition. Her mental breakdown is led to by a fascination with the wallpaper in her sleeping room. At first look, her encompassing setting doesn't appear to be a daunting Gothic setting, but as she tells us the story, it is become one of the most daunting rooms that one could ever imagine.
Also, both of these short stories portray different women's autonomy. For A Rose for Emily, Emily has a power to not pay tax.
Kill anything up to an elephant, but what you need, I'm sure.
Arsenic. Is that a good one?
She is also able to buy a poison. Despite living in a patriarchal culture, readers can assume that Emily still can do what she wants. However, the situation is different for The Yellow Wallpaper, where the narrator's husband has a full control on her. He forbids her to do activities those she enjoys to cure her temporary nervous disorder. The husband chooses them the estate and the room that they stay, even though the narrator confesses her unpleasant feeling on both of the house and the room. Both of A Rose of Emily and The Yellow Wallpaper have a society who perceive mental illness differently. For A Rose of Emily, the townspeople are aware that Emily has a great aunt, Old Lady Wyatt, who is a crazy woman. However, they did not realize that Emily is a woman who suffers mental illness. Only the reader can deduce that Emily suffers mental illness as she sleeps with a corpse. However, the situation in the yellow wallpaper is different, where the side characters try to cure the narrator's mental illness. However, this cure deteriorates narrator's health. It can be seen that the narrators are aware with the presence of mental illness, but the method to treat this illness is in fact ineffective. There are different points of view on these short stories. For Rose, for Emily, the narrators are the townspeople of Jefferson, Mississippi, where Emily lives. Meanwhile, for the yellow wallpaper, this is a first-person narrative of a 19th century woman who suffers from a mental breakdown after giving birth.
There are several elements that we find prominently similar between two stories. Both stories have similar themes, which are isolation and patriarchal chauvinism. In both stories, Emily and the wife, they are overly protected by male figure, the father, the husband. Two objects in the title of both stories, rose and yellow wallpaper, symbolizes uncertainty. Roses are flowers that are thorny, but yet they are given widely to lovers as a symbol of love. What kind of love is it? Is it to give affection or to give pain? Just like Homer Byron, who shows affection towards Emily, but in the end he didn't want to get married. Both main characters are women, Emily and the unnamed narrator. Both of them are trapped in their house mostly throughout the story by a patriarchal image. For Emily, it would be his father, Mr. Grayson. Her father separated her from the town folks and didn't allow her to have any lover or husband. When her father dies, it took her quite some time to accept his death. As for the narrator in the yellow wallpaper, her movement was controlled by her husband, John, and this really stresses her. When she wanted to do her writing, she would do it when there is nobody around. At one point, they have reached their limit. Emily and the narrator themselves chooses to be in the house under one's own will.
Gothic culture is famous due to the gloomy and dark nature associated with it. The elements of Gothic include mystery, suspense, terror, horror, and romance. Let's see the timeline of evolution of Gothic elements. It consists of the beginning, the 18th century, the 19th century, and the 20th century. Briefly, in the 18th century, the term Gothic was used in medieval times in the field of architecture for constructions of buildings. The character of buildings helped authors to assemble the emotions of awe, despair, fear, isolation, and suspense. The first novel of Gothic romance is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. A typical Gothic novel has the elements of old, abandoned castle, foggy forest, curses, revengeful villain, and mysterious beautiful women. Later, 18th century is the beginning of Gothic era. The novel in this era has a setting of mystery, suspense, ancient prophecies, and beautiful heroines. In 19th century, there is development of the first science novel, the famous monster Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Then later, the character of vampire was introduced and is still famous even today. The later 19th century, there is slow decline of traditional Gothic genre. Most of the authors focus on modern Gothic genre and female Gothic literature. By 20th century, the elements of Gothic focuses on both genre, traditional and modern. Today, the aspect of Gothic is different. Immortals and supernatural beings are being used instead of ghosts and spirits. The terror aspect also has been changed from extremely dangerous to a mystery-like approach.